Sunny New Orleans is the background for hundreds of excited passengers that join the city ferry to celebrate another Mardi Gras holiday. The foghorn announces that it's time to go. Families and a large group of Marines get together to enjoy the festive trip. Everyone is having the time of their lives, including dozens of children. A ferry employee oversees the cars and he hears a car radio playing the Beach Boys, which is weird, because all the vehicles on the ferry must be turned off so the journey may begin. He tries to open the car, but it's locked. He goes around it, puzzled by the situation, but before he has any time to react to what he just saw, a large number of explosives go off. The ferry and its passengers are hit by the violent blast. Soon, the police, Coast Guard, fire department, and ambulances arrive at the site. Families of the passengers are also arriving, in complete disbelief and fear. Agent Doug Carlin has also arrived. He's a quiet man, an observer, and a very meticulous investigator with the ATF Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. He sees the tiny things the rest of the world misses. The FBI agent Paul Priswara joins the investigation. He joins Doug in the pursuit of leads. Quickly, Doug learns the ingredients of the bomb and briefs his seniors with precise information on how the explosive device was made and possible angles of the attack. Back at the ATF headquarters, Doug begins analyzing the surveillance cameras of the surroundings of the explosion. He reaches for his partner, Larry, who's on vacation and is about to return immediately due to the extraordinary circumstances. Not long after the footage of the bridge starts, Doug notices a person standing by the bridge, looking down at the river just minutes before the attack, which is odd considering the heavy flow of cars on the bridge. Doug takes a call from a colleague that tells him a woman, Claire, has been found with severe burns, and that the children who found her by the river called in around 10:42, which intrigues Doug. At the morgue, Doug studies meticulously the strange elements surrounding Claire's fatal accident. She has an earring missing. So far, most of his work has been done alone, and it seems like he doesn't mind it. He reaches out for Claire's next of kin, her father, who recognizes his daughter's face on a Polaroid. Doug asks for details on Claire's life. He senses something is off. Claire should have picked her father up at the airport, but she pulled a no-show. She broke up her engagement with Alan recently and was supposed to go on a date with someone her father doesn't know the night of her disappearance. Claire's father gives Doug the keys to Claire's house. His investigation reaches new heights. The city recovers from the Mardi Gras celebration leftovers, as the streets are still filthy. Doug is at Claire's home and is greeted by her kitten. It's clear that someone has been to her house recently. There are bloodstains on the floor and over the sink, and multiple voice messages on her landline. In the bathroom, more blood is on a piece of clothing. One of the voice messages he hears takes this mystery to a whole new level. It's his own voice, saying that he's returning Claire's call and giving her his number. He can't make sense of that. Doug goes to the FBI's investigation site, where they collect evidence from everything they recovered from the ferry. He briefs the FBI men on how Claire's case is linked to the ferry's case. Before leaving, he notices his partner Larry's car parked there. He is happy Larry has finally returned from vacation and asks the FBI people where he is. Silence. FBI agent Jack McCreary gives him the bad news. Those parked cars belong to the victims. Doug's smile fades quickly off his face. He walks away. After Doug leaves, McCreary and Paul talk about Doug and his current personal status. They agree that he's a solid guy. Later that day, Paul meets Doug and invites him to take part in a unique line of investigation, something that has never been experienced or exposed before. Paul describes what sounds like a delicate investigation. He needs someone who's from the area and able to see the crime scene once to come up with intel on how things went down, what the investigation missed, and what they should pursue. All that, in a very narrow time frame. Paul takes Doug to a huge facility where mechanics and engineers work on an enormous machine. He doesn't understand a single thing. He's taken to a control room and is advised to comment on anything unusual he may see on the footage. He recognizes the ferry before the explosion, but all angles and sounds are completely different, and they keep changing. The FBI agents in the control room officially recruit Doug to lead the investigation. This time, they'll follow his lead by using this time-bending machine that recorded the day of the explosion. The technology of this machine allows them to navigate through the city, exploring different points of view on the day of the explosion. Doug is the one expected to bring a new angle of the investigation to the table, and his first decision is to rewind the tape of that day and go straight to Claire's home address. They jump right into the moment that Claire receives a call from her ex-fiancé Alan, who asks for money. Doug can identify the number he's calling from. He's so intrigued that not even a phone call from ATF makes him lose sight of every image he sees in the footage. His colleague from ATF is at Claire's house when he calls Doug and asks Doug the reason why his fingerprints are all over the place. Doug can't answer. He has no clue what his ATF colleague is talking about. They continue to watch through her day at home. Doug is in complete awe of the case and mesmerized by Claire. The next day, he attends her funeral. Not many people go, but it's a beautiful service. Doug is paying attention to other things and believes that her stalker was there, too. Back in the control room, they keep on searching for clues in the footage and bump into something. Claire is at a bar and answers a phone call from a guy who's interested in buying the car she's been desperately trying to sell to get rid of Alan. The man tries to close the deal and asks where he can meet her to get the car. Unfortunately, before she even says anything to the guy on the phone, Doug knows she made a bad move. That's when she gives the buyer her home address. They track the caller and his steps 2 days before the ferry attack. He went to the Algiers ferry dock late at night, carrying a bag. Doug and the FBI agents watch new parts of Claire's life, but something got stuck in his mind. Now, she's babysitting a little blonde girl, and he feels like testing his theory that although they're watching the footage, it's still possible to manipulate the past and maybe change the horrifying developments of that Mardi Gras morning. Doug uses a simple infrared light and points to the screen. Suddenly, the entire system crashes, right after Claire sees the red light. That's a breakthrough for him, and he demands an explanation from the FBI agents. They throw the theory of the Einstein-Rosen bridge in Doug's face, and he's furious. Doug is determined to make the FBI agents find a way to send a message to the past and warn Claire, or even the ATF about the ferry attacker, but the agents keep giving explanations as to why it is impossible to bend the rules of physics. There's one tiny possibility, though. Branty, one of the agents, explains the flow of time as being a river that you can, somehow, create a new branch, a new stream of water. They could be done with time, but not without high stakes. According to this theory, they may be able to change the past to avoid the explosion and Claire's devastating ending, but they wouldn't know their timeline, and the old branch would cease to exist. The plan to change the past is afoot. They send Doug a clear message the night before the attack. The note is through and lands on Larry's desk, but Doug has already left. Larry finds the note, and Doug comes to the devastating conclusion that he's the reason why Larry went to the ferry on the day of the attack. Doug and the FBI agents have access to the footage of the moment the attacker arrives at the dock and can, finally, see his face. They immediately run a background check to find his ID. Nothing. The footage shows Larry approaching the attacker in his car. It doesn't take long for Larry to be put down. The attacker drives away. Doug is truly running against the clock and has to reach the attacker at any cost. He plugs himself into a goggle rig that allows him to follow back the flow of time and observe. It's not an easy task, and it's even harder because he's driving fast. Doug finds the man, and the car chase is breathtaking, even more so because Doug is in the present and is chasing a car from the past through the augmented reality goggles. The pursuit continues on the busy highways, and the goggles are gone after Doug's crashed his car. That's not a walk-in-the-park kind of situation. Doug drives by instinct and follows the directions of the FBI team from the control room. He arrives at an old property hidden behind the woods. Doug sees a destroyed house with an ambulance torched in it. Everything is burned, but back in the control room, the FBI team sees the opposite. The house is standing, and there's no ambulance in sight. Everything seems normal until Doug reaches the back of the destroyed house. It's abandoned, like the rest of the property, but the images he's sending to the control room show the attacker dragging Larry out of his car. Doug spots a stain on the wooden floor. The control room tells him that Larry is there, but he's still alive. What they are about to witness will break Doug's soul. The attacker starts a fire, and Larry is gone. Doug still looks for clues and sees another super strange thing. A crocodile is feasting on something big. By now, the police are already all over the place looking for evidence. Doug finds something he saw at the beginning of everything. That's Claire's missing earring. The police have found an ID, Carol Oerstadt. Now, they have his name and address. The place is filthy, but there's no sign of Carol. The police officers don't leave empty-handed, though. The house is packed with evidence and a receipt for a boat rental. Soon enough, police helicopters are piercing the sky, and police boats dividing the river. Every effort pointed at Carol Oerstadt. He's trapped. Carol faces Doug in his cell. Doug has the good cop approach, and Carol doesn't seem to have any trouble answering his question. Carol talks softly. He seems like a quiet guy with strong beliefs. According to his perspective on the attack, he was making a statement to show the U.S. government that they failed him when they rejected his submission to the Marines. Doug steps out of the cell to get him a cigarette, and the conversation carries on. He gives the most horrific details of how he put his plan in motion. He talks about Larry, Claire, and the ferry. He's confident that nothing is going to happen to him, not the way Doug wants. He speaks of being destined for something great, and that there's nothing Doug can do to change that. Doug meets McCreary and Paul, and they have strong opposing opinions about Claire's case. Doug wants to get Carol to confess to the crime, but McCreary is satisfied with his confessions on Larry and the ferry. Doug goes back to Claire's house, and after everything he went through in his pursuit of justice, it changes the way he sees everything in her home, including some magnet letters on the fridge door. The magnet's message is straight to the point. He can save her. Besides the magnet letters, there's a church flyer, and now he knows what to do. The clock is ticking again. He confides in Danny, the control room FBI agent, his intent to get in the machine and go back to that night to find Claire at the church. Doug squeezes inside the machine and Danny presses the play button. That is the real breakthrough of the investigation. Doug lands in a hospital. He's in complete shock, but the doctors save him. It's Tuesday morning, the day of the ferry attack, and time is short. He crosses the city in an ambulance he took from the hospital. Carol is in the final steps of his attack's preparation. Claire is held hostage in his place. Doug does the impossible. He storms into Carol's house with the ambulance. Carol tries to run away, but before that, he traps Doug inside his house by releasing gas from dozens of tanks. The house explodes, but Doug gets to Claire in time. Carol drives away, and so do Doug and Claire as they rush to the Algiers dock, but Doug is hurt and getting weak. They stop by Claire's house to get his wound patched up, and that explains the DNA and fingerprints all over her kitchen. Time is running out, and there's nothing more Doug can do. He has to tell Claire the truth, because she's out of control trying to understand what's happening. He leaves one tiny detail out, though. The moment he realizes everything is happening the same way, he gets Claire and leaves the house. They get to Algiers dock, and so do the happy Navy sailors and the cute families that are about to get on board the ferry. Claire spots her car in the parked ferry at the same moment that Doug spots Carol in the crowd. Doug advises her to go to the officers as soon as the ferry pulls off. Carol keeps running away from the ferry. Doug joins the passengers on the ferry, but Carol notices something strange. Doug's car is also there at the docks, so he sprints back to the ferry. Claire rushes, but not to the police officers, to the ferry instead. She's in the car deck, and so is Carol. Things get out of hand. Carol loses his temper with Doug, and the standoff begins. Claire is, once again, held hostage in her car. Claire and Doug somehow manage to work together, as Claire hits Carol with her car, and Doug ends him. But now the police want them out of the vehicle, and Doug knows that it could cost everybody's lives. So Claire pushes the gas down and they fall into the river. The explosive device is almost ready to engage at 10:50 sharp. Claire saves herself, but it seems like Doug can't leave the sunken car. It's 10:50 now. The passengers leave the ferry safely, and Claire is shaking with shock beside a police officer. He asks her to stay put and wait to give her statement. She's heartbroken. Something clicks in her mind when she sees the officer who's going to get her statement. That's Doug Carlin, and he has no idea of the turmoil he and Claire have just been through, but Claire knows that one day he will understand, and she'll be there with him.